I have attended a great many evenings at Pemberton Hall over the years, and I will be honest with you. I had not expected this one to be any different from the others. Aldous Pemberton gives 4 charity concerts each season. The guests are the same guests, the trustees, the patrons, the wives of patrons, a sprinkling of civic dignitaries who enjoy the vol events and the feeling of having done something worthwhile. The program is printed on cream card. The piano is a Bosendorfer Imperial that Aldous inherited from his father and polishes with the devotion most men reserve for their own reputations. I have sat in that music room a dozen times, drunk his excellent claret, listened to the featured artist, and driven home feeling pleasantly cultured. That is what Pemberton Hall evenings are. This was not that. My name is Clifford Haynes. I retired from the Army at the rank of Brigadier General some 8 years ago, and I now serve as a trustee of the Pemberton Charitable Foundation, the body that organizes these evenings and channels the proceeds toward veterans' welfare. I say that not to establish credentials, but because it matters to what happened. The foundation funds a veterans support program, and one of the small arrangements Aldous had made with the local VA hospital was that they sometimes sent a man to help with the heavier logistics, setting up additional seating, moving the refreshment table, that sort of thing. The man they sent that November evening was Francis Dowd. He arrived at 5:30 in a dark green orderly's jacket, a clipboard under one arm, and the unhurried composure of a man who has been given a job to do and intends to do it correctly. I noticed him because I arrived early, old military habit, and I watched him arrange 2 rows of gilt chairs with a precision that reminded me, without quite knowing why, of someone laying out a dress uniform before inspection. He was 68, perhaps, gray at the temples, with the kind of build that had once been powerful and was now simply solid and quiet. He did not introduce himself to anyone. He finished the chairs, checked his clipboard, and stood near the doorway to the hall with the patience of a man well accustomed to waiting. The guests arrived in their black tie and their pearls. Francis moved around the edges, refreshment table repositioned, program cards fanned on the side console. I saw one of the younger guests nearly walk into him with a glass of champagne and not apologize. Francis stepped aside without a word. The evening was supposed to begin at 7. At 5 past, Aldous's personal assistant materialized at his elbow with the expression of someone delivering unwelcome news quietly. The featured pianist, a young man of considerable reputation who had been booked for £800, and a 2-night hotel, had telephoned from a motorway service station 40 minutes away. A puncture. Could not say when he would arrive. The room was assembled. The Bosendorfer sat on its low stage at the far end of the music room, lid open, silent. I watched Aldous's jaw set. He was not a man who tolerated a gap in the program. He glanced around the room with the practiced scan of a host managing a small crisis, and his eye landed on Francis Dowd, who was at that moment standing near the piano carrying a stack of printed menus that no longer needed to go anywhere. "You," Aldous said. He said it the way men of his background sometimes say it to men in service jackets, not unkindly, exactly, but without the particular effort they extend to people they consider to be in the same room as themselves. "Do you play?" "Even a little. Give us something to fill the gap while we wait. Simple is fine, whatever you know." The nearest guests heard it. There was a small ripple of polite amusement, the way a room smiles at a host who is managing a situation with good humor. Somebody murmured something behind me. A woman near the fireplace turned to her companion. Francis looked at Aldous for a moment. Then he looked at the piano. The expression on his face was not readable to most people in that room, I suspect, but I have spent a career reading men's faces in the moments before they do something that costs them something. There was a stillness in him that I recognized without being able to name. He set the menus down on the console table. He handed his clipboard to the assistant. He crossed the room to the piano and down on the bench. The bench was at the wrong height. He adjusted it. 2 turns of the mechanism, unhurried, the way a man sets something right that has been slightly wrong for a long time. He placed his hands in his lap for a moment and looked at the keys, not nervously, simply looking. The room waited with the particular quality of patience that has amusement underneath it. Then he played the first note. I have tried since to describe what happened to the air in that room at that moment, and I have not managed it. The note was the opening of Debussy's Clair de Lune, a single chord, soft, suspended, the kind of sound that seems to arrive from somewhere further away than the instrument. but it was not the note itself. It was what was inside the note. There was grief in it. Old grief, the kind that has been pressed flat by years of weight and has not gone away, only compressed. The sound reached the room before the room had decided how to receive it, and I watched the smiles flicker and go out, one by one, the way candles go when a door opens somewhere in a house. Nobody laughed. He played the opening measure slowly, not tentatively, but with the deliberateness of a man for whom every note has a specific weight. The clair de lune is a piece many people know from sitting rooms and school recitals and films about things that are beautiful and sad, and most people have heard it played pleasantly and moved on. This was not pleasant. I do not mean it was harsh or imperfect. I mean that pleasantness was not what was in the room. What was in the room was something that pressed against the chest and would not move. The woman near the fireplace had stopped speaking to her companion. Aldous Pemberton stood 3 feet from where he had been standing, which is to say he had not moved, and his expression had changed in the way that a man's expression changes when he has made a small, inconsequential joke and discovered too late that it was not a joke at all. I sat forward in my chair. Francis Dowd played the piano, the way men who have survived something play the things they were taught before the surviving. Not for us. That is what I want to be clear about. He was not performing. He was not even, in the ordinary sense, playing. He was doing something private that we happened to be present for, and the music let us in because music has no lock on its door, and the only price of admission is the willingness to be quiet. The cascade in the middle section, the rising arpeggios that give the piece its famous shimmer, he played with a restraint that made them more urgent, not less. He did not hurry. He did not lean into the sentiment. His left hand held the bass steady and patient, like a man standing his ground, while his right hand moved across the upper keys with the measured fluency of someone who has known a thing so long it has ceased to be technique and becomes simply the way the hands move when the mind goes quiet. He played it as though he were remembering it from the inside of something he had once known well and had not touched in a very long time, and the remembering itself was the music. I heard someone behind me exhale, long and slow, without seeming to know they were doing it. The chandelier above the Bosendorfer gave off its usual warm gold, and in that light Francis Dowd's face was entirely still. The room had 60 people in it, all in evening dress, all from the particular world that attends these evenings. A world that has opinions about musical interpretation and considers itself knowledgeable in these matters. Not one of them said a word. Not one of them moved. I have been in rooms during formal silences, during prayers, during the playing of anthems at funerals. I have never been in a silence of this texture. This silence had something alive in it. It was the silence of a room holding its breath not out of protocol but out of instinct, the way you hold your breath when something fragile is happening. And you do not want to be the one who breaks it. He brought the piece home through its final section with the same interior authority. Those soft repeated chords, the diminuendo, the last note held and then released, not cut short, allowed to fade at its own pace into the room. And then it was over. Nobody moved for 3 or 4 seconds. That is a long time when 60 people are in a room together. Then somebody, I don't know who, began to applaud. Not the enthusiastic applause of approval, something quieter, more private, the kind of applause that is really a long exhalation given shape. And then the room joined it. A woman in the 3rd row had her hand pressed to her collarbone. The man beside me cleared his throat twice and looked at the ceiling. I did not look at the ceiling. I had enough years behind me to sit with what I was feeling, without needing to look away from it. Aldous Pemberton began to applaud. He stood near the Bosendorfer's lid, and he clapped with his hands held high, and his face had the expression of a man who has made an error of measurement so large that he cannot quite calculate it yet. He did not speak. Francis Dowd sat at the piano for a moment after the applause began. He placed both hands flat on his thighs. Then he stood, straightened his orderly's jacket, and walked back to retrieve his clipboard from the assistant. I followed him. It took me a moment to find my legs, if I am honest. I caught him near the doorway to the hall, and I introduced myself, my name, that I was a trustee of the foundation, that I was a retired soldier. He shook my hand with the firm, undemonstrative grip of a man who has spent time in organized ranks. I told him that I had not heard anything like that in a very long time. I did not know what else to say. He looked at the middle distance for a moment, as though checking something. My son was a private, he said. Served 2 tours. He died in the second. He paused. I played piano before. I taught him a few pieces when he was small. Clair de Lune was the one he asked me to play the last time I was home before his final deployment. He looked down at his clipboard. I hadn't touched a piano since the letter came. That was 12 years ago. He said this without drama, in the same tone a man might use to say he had not visited a particular town in 12 years. I don't know why I sat down tonight. I suppose it seemed time. I shook his hand again. I did not have words that were adequate to the moment, and I have learned over a long career that when words are not adequate, it is better not to offer them than to offer inadequate ones. Aldous Pemberton's featured pianist arrived at 22:08. He played very well. He received a warm reception and a sustained ovation. He was, by any measure, an accomplished and well-trained musician. I could not have told you afterward what he played. What I could tell you, what I can still tell you, with the precision of a thing you do not forget, is a man in a green orderly's jacket sitting at a Bosendorfer Imperial and opening his hands over the keys as though setting something down he had carried for 12 years. I can tell you the sound of 60 people forgetting to breathe. I can tell you that grief, when it is played without self-pity, becomes something else. Something more like a door left open than a wound. And what comes through the door is not sadness, but the fact that the person you lost was real, was loved, was worth a clair de lune played in a room full of strangers who would not understand and did not need to. Francis Dowd collected his coat from the cloakroom at 9 o'clock and walked out into the November evening with his clipboard. I watched him go from the doorway. He walked the way men walk when they have put something down that they have been carrying for a long time. Not lighter, exactly, differently weighted. I drove home and sat in my kitchen for a while without turning the lights on. I thought about Private Thomas Dowd, whom I had never met, and about the things we hand on to our children, and about how long 12 years is to hold a piece of music inside you with nowhere to put it. And I thought about what it means that a room full of people who came for an evening of pleasant culture sat in absolute silence for a man in a hospital orderly's jacket and understood, without being told anything, that they were in the presence of something true,